Did we lose you?
Nope. Hey, it's Scott. She's going to transfer things over to me, so I'm getting ready to do my presentation. And thanks everybody for joining. Let's see. I've gotten so used to using Teams for doing presentations that sometimes doing things with other platforms gets to be interesting. Let's see if we can do this. Da, 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 da. Where do we go? There we go. All right. Hopefully, folks can see my screen. Let me know.
Not yet.
Interesting.
I had to make you a host. You should be now.
Oh, oh, exciting. Wonder if I have to reshare it to wake things up.
I think you do, yeah.
I know a
Okay.
lot of people moving from Teams to Zoom that have multiple monitors can have problems sharing too.
Yeah, I have multiple monitors and hopefully things
That's why my key point was so weird earlier. It was trying to put the presenter view on one and then the presentation on the other.
gotcha. Let's see if we can get this thing to cooperate. If not, we'll talk through it and we can distribute the slides later. Um, I'll talk through the slides. I don't want to hold everybody up. So, hey, good afternoon. My name is Scott Wright. I have misophonia, as we'll talk about. And what I'm going to talk about kind of recaps what we've talked about earlier in the day and kind of brings things together in a practical experience. We've talked a lot about what misophonia is, how people react to it, how we can work with others regarding it. And I've been asked to talk about misophonia and traveling. I travel a lot. Um, I probably travel a good 50% of the year. So, as a sufferer from misophonia, it gets to be a very interesting experience for me. So, a little bit about me. A little over 55 years old. I'm older than I'd like to think that I am. I've had misophonia longer than I can remember. I can remember distinctly as a teenager, and this is long before the phrase was formed in 2001-ish. Um, and I was always told that I had sensitive hearing, and your ears might be really sensitive, and you always think it was you yourself that had this problem. And one of the best things about this group, and I saw the chatter earlier about the Facebook group, is you're not alone. By far, you're not alone. There's a lot of us. There's many more of us than we think, and you think that nobody else can possibly have this condition and that there's got to be something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. There's a lot of people that have this condition. And it's a matter of learning how to deal with the condition as well as the education part. And that's where a lot of the stuff that Shaylin does with education and outreach and awareness and working to get that diagnosis included so that it's recognized and so that there's some kind of research that's gone into it, as well as looking at some of these folks that are peddling some kind of cure for it. There is no cure for it right now. We wish there was. I wish there was. So I've had it for a long, long time. I've learned some coping strategies along the way. If I had to classify myself, I'd say I have a moderate case of it. Um, I know others that get significantly more triggered easily than I do. I also know some folks that have it that don't get triggered as easily as I do. So eh, again, I'd consider myself moderate. Usually, some days are worse than others, like we've talked about. Um, I have misophonia as well as the dyskinesia uh, that Shaylin talked about in the previous presentation. I can't stand leg shaking. It drives me absolutely up a tree. I was traveling just this past week, and I'm sitting at a restaurant in the airport because I needed to grab a bite to eat, and there was somebody sitting there doing shaking both legs at once, and I was just like, "Oh, can you please just stop?" And I had to divert my gaze and shift where I was sitting, and it's just awful. You think misophonia is bad enough? Miscegenesia makes it even worse. It's like the topping on the cake. Like I talked about, I travel, um, planes, trains, and automobiles. I take all the different forms of transportation. I experience it all. Um, I do a lot of traveling for work. I'll be traveling tomorrow. I was traveling all last week, and I will be traveling starting tomorrow morning bright and early on a train. Last week was planes, this week is trains. So, and the week before was automobiles. So I get to experience it all. I have a bunch of different things that I have to look at. I am a bit of a Disney nut. I will be in Disney in a couple of weeks. I'm an annual pass holder. I am there quite a bit. And if you want to see a wide variety of people in a small space, just go to Disney. And people look at me like I'm a little crazy with, you have misophonia and you go to Disney. And yeah, I go to misophonia. I have misophonia and I go to Disney. There are some triggers down there and I've learned to deal with it. Um, I absolutely positively hate this condition. It's awful. Um, John, I feel bad. Feel for your daughter. It's awful, and I don't know if the other folks on the conference have it or not. It's absolutely horrendous. It separates you from your family. It separates you from other business associates. It separates you from other things, and you learn to work with it. Um, I have the fortunate ability that I can sit in an office by myself. One of the best things that ever happened with the COVID shutdown in 2020 is we diversified our office and we are all over the place. We could work from home. We could um, find our other areas to work in, and we found a offsite location for what I do. I work in public safety with telecommunications, and I basically work by myself. I don't have anybody else here in the office. So if you have misophonia and dyskinesia, it's a great place to be because I had a coworker that would trigger me like every darn day, and I absolutely love where I get to work now. It's very calming and it helps me with get me through my day. Um, Please don't ever let anybody tell you that this condition does not exist. It absolutely does. Just because it isn't included in the diagnostic manuals and insurance codes and everything else that goes along with it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's the name of it's only existed for a little over 20 years. It's a relatively new finding. There's a lot of work that's been gone on in the background to explore it, define it, try to wrap everybody's arms around it in a scientific way of being able to say it's if you have this, and this, then you meet the criteria. That's a hard thing to do, especially when it's not very well funded. If your coworkers or family members don't have it, consider yourself blessed because it's a living hell and it's a living nightmare. Um, a little bit about trigger warnings. Different people are triggered by different things, and it's impossible to cover every trigger, but um, I'm going to try my best not to invoke any triggers, and my apologies in advance if I say something that is triggering. I'm not going to use slide transitions. I'm not going to do pictures, anything like that, because I've done that in the past, and people have come up to me and said, "Hey, this has triggered me," so I don't want to do that with you folks. So some of my triggers, and this kind of tracks with what Shaylin talked about earlier, mouth noises. Um, Basically, any kind of mouth noise will trigger me. And like Shaylin pointed out in the chat, it doesn't necessarily have to make noise. I don't necessarily have to hear it. If I see somebody doing it, if I see somebody chewing gum with their mouth open, if I see somebody chewing with their mouth open, that's a trigger for me. Throat clearing is a big trigger for me. Pen clicking, loose change jingling in their pockets. I had a person I used to work with in a supervisory capacity, and he'd sit there and every time he talked to him would be jingling coins in his pockets, and it drove me absolutely up a tree. And it took me a while to figure that out. Sniffling, huge trigger with me. I have one to politely ask, or I try to politely ask, um, to not sniffle or to use Kleenex. And if they don't get the hint, then usually start to get a little cranky about it. Like Shaylin said, the best approach is to be calm about it and just gently explain things, and usually that works. Sometimes it doesn't. Some people are just ridiculous. Um, and again, the repetitive movements, the leg shaking, the um, people that rock in their chair, those kinds of things just absolutely drive me up an absolute tree. And we talked about fight, flight, or freeze. Um, and in a professional environment, sometimes that's really difficult. I do a lot of presentations. I go to different conferences. I do a lot of things like that, and you can't always leave. And um, it's difficult. So I've learned kind of live with how to live with it and how to deal with it. And guess what I'm exposed to when I'm traveling? Everything that we've talked about.
I just want to
Absolutely
jump in
everything.
for 2 seconds. Sorry. I
It's
changed
okay.
some settings so you might be able to stop the share and try again. I've been kind of tinkering in the background.
Okay. Let's see if I can get this to work. Da-da-da-da. Let's see if I can. Um, give me 2 seconds.
No problem. And it's usually on the bottom bar on desktop. I find Zoom changes things every time. The buttons are never in the same spot.
Yeah, Teams is the same way. It's kind of crazy. How about now?
Yes, you are
Fabulous.
sharing now.
That's
Yeah,
so
I think there were
exciting.
some settings that were weird, so sorry about that,
Okay.
everybody.
Yeah, I appreciate the patience, everybody. So yeah, I guess what happens when I'm traveling, all of these things. I used to not travel. And when work demanded that I start traveling and sharing things and going from there, yeah, that whole misophonia thing, misophonia, support myself. Yeah, I had to figure out a few things. So, uh, like many, when we talked about this, misophonia invokes my fight or flight response. A lot of times we choose to flee, we choose to get out of there, or we tense up, we freeze up. And then if we're backed into a corner, we come out fighting like a dog. And if somebody gets that bad with me, it's really bad. Most of the time, my response is mild. I had a party that I worked with all the time that did constant throat clearing. And it got to the point, and Shaylin talked earlier about mimicry. I'd keep a running tab of all the times that he'd be clearing his throat during a meeting, and it was ridiculous. And that was just to keep my mind off of different things, and I couldn't really mimic it. But I find myself doing mimicry at times with others. Um, at times it's at the extreme end of the scale. Different environmental things, whatever, trigger me, and it's awful. Um, and I'll really have a bad day. But it always produces stress, all of it. John, I saw the comment earlier about your daughter being exhausted all the time. I'm exhausted all the time. My job is a lot of mental work, but if I'm in a conference space, I was at a conference last week. If I'm in a conference space, I get exhausted just because I'm having to anticipate what people are going to do. And my mind is constantly going of, what happens if? Do I have an escape route? Do I have a way to cope with it? Do I have all my things that we'll talk about in a little bit that prepare me to be able to deal with this? And it's a constantly thing going in your head. And it's awful. It's absolutely awful, but it absolutely produces stress. Um, while traveling, it's oftentimes impossible to flee. If I'm in a plane, can't move my seat. I can't leave the plane if I'm up at 37,000 feet. I can't um, shift around. I can't get up and walk around. So how do I deal with that? I'll be on a train tomorrow. It'll be very difficult for me to move my seat in a train, particularly as it gets more and more busy. It's not a commuter train, but it's a Amtrak passenger train, and as people come in, as the train gets busier, it's going to be really difficult for me to move. So um, those things are going to be on my mind. I'm going to arrive at my destination exhausted because of this. And I usually can't control who sits near me. We talked about having supportive family and friends around us. Um, I'll have a stranger sitting next to me, and God, I pray that I can deal with it, and I pray that they're not going to be triggering to me. I had a guy next to me on my last train trip that sat there and shook his leg the entire time, and I had a real hard time with it, but I dealt with it. So some of my coping strategies when I travel, coping strategies in an otherwise uncontrollable environment is really important. And you have to have it if you are going to need or want to travel. I need to travel for work. I want to travel for recreation. Each person's triggers and responses to those triggers are as individual as they are. It is extremely important for everybody to learn what works for you. What works for me may not necessarily work for somebody else. It may be something different, and that's okay. Um, but you have to learn these things. Usually it's by trial and error. Usually, and that's where if you look at some of the things that Shaylin posts with Misophonia International, with some of the coping strategies, we're all here to share information. You heard Sharon earlier with some of her stuff. That we're here to share that information. We're here to share from our experiences. And if you take something away from it that works, that's great. But don't be afraid of trying something on your own because everybody's individual. So some of the auditory things that I think about as we and have worked for me, the goal is to reduce or eliminate the auditory triggers. The actual hearing things that trigger me. So a couple of things that work for me is earplugs, some active noise canceling headphones. I just charged my headphones up for tomorrow, and physical spacing. So with the earplugs, not everybody can use them. Some folks have sensory issues that prevent their use. Some folks have allergies. Some folks have different things that prevent different earplugs from being used. There are a bunch of different types. Some are silicone, some are foam, some are made of other different materials. The ones that I found that work personally for me are the soft foam beige ones, and I usually have a couple of pair. Every morning before I go to a conference, I make sure I have a pair in my pocket. I make sure I have backup pair in my laptop bag. I make sure I have them. And part of that is reassurance to me that, you know what, if something comes up, I can protect myself. I can say, Scott, you got this. You put them in, you're going to be good. And I found like with the soft foam beige ones, people don't know you're using the darn things. Um, and that works out pretty well. So you're not drawing attention to yourself. You're not making a spectacle out of yourself in a public setting. Um, I use the earplugs routinely as a preventative in meetings. I have a meeting coming up the end of June that I'm not looking forward to because I know it's the same set of people that will be there. I know some of them will do nothing but trigger me. There are people in there that I can't participate in Teams meetings. We talked about Teams, we talked about Zoom, that I can't participate in Teams meetings or Zoom meetings because they'll sit there and they will sniffle. And I'll be like, I, I just can't listen to it. It drives me cuckoo. So I use them as a routine preventative in meetings. Why wait to be triggered? Why induce yourself into some stress if you don't have to? And I found that it actually helps me focus. My brain helps me focus on the speaker. It helps me focus on the conversation at hand, and it attenuates all that extraneous noise for me. And again, I find them to be discreet. I can wear them, nobody knows, and I like it that way. Some of the pros with the earplugs, easy to carry, they're disposable, they're cheap. You you can buy them dozens at a time for relatively low amounts of money. Some of the cons, you might need to remove them to have conversations. If I'm sitting at a table and I have a conversation with somebody sitting at that table, I may have to remove the earplug in order to be able to hear them, and that's okay. And usually the people, if I sit with, they know me, so they get used to it. Um, the active noise canceling headphones, I prefer the over-the-ear type with the full earmuff. Very difficult to hide that. People are going to see you wearing a darn thing. Some folks like the in the ear type, like the earbuds that Apple has, that kind of thing. Some people, it works better for them. Um, there are many to choose from. There are some that are active noise canceling. Those work better for me. I like the active noise canceling. You may have to try several different models. Shaylin's talked about them with doing reviews on different headsets and headphones. You may want to try them, read the reviews, see the positives and the negatives, see what they like, what they don't like. I also use music and movies and shows in the background. I have my active noise canceling headphone connected to my iPad, and I will save movies. I will download movies and music so I can listen to that to help drown out everything else that the active noise cancellation doesn't do. Um, it works. It works for me. Usually try to find movies and music that I like to listen to. Again, they work. One of the downsides is you need to charge them. Some of these last longer than others. I have one that will last me a week. I currently use the Bose headset, and they don't last that long, and it makes me a little nervous when I'm going across the country and I have a long flight. If I have a good 12-hour flight to head from the West Coast to the East Coast, I'm on the East Coast of the United States. If I have to take a 12-hour flight to get back, I start to get a little nervous and come up with a backup plan. And if I have a layover at an airport, I usually try to charge the headphones just so I can have them. Something to consider. And I carry a spare battery bank with me just to be able to do that in case I'm not near an outlet. Um, Auditory physical spacing. Sometimes it's really hard to achieve in a conference setting, in a table setting. It can be really, really difficult to achieve some physical spacing. It's very much a trial and error process. Trying to figure out how far away you can be, sitting in the back of a room sometimes, sitting near a door, so if you get triggered, you can exit stage left and de-stress yourself. And it's that spacing that you need is going to vary tremendously per person. Everybody's individual. Physical spacing in planes. I have to control where I sit. Absolutely, positively have to control where I sit for a couple different reasons. We talked about concomitant things that go along with this wonderful condition. Part of mine is I have a little bit of PTSD kicking in from what I've done. I've worked in public safety my entire life. We won't talk about what I've done, what I've seen, but I do have some PTSD. I also worked in corrections for 10 and a half years. So I absolutely positively have to control where I sit. I have to control my environment. And part of that is the noise. Part of that, pardon me, part of that is being able to control what I can see and what I can do. If I'm on a plane, I see somebody going for the door in a hostile action, it'll be a bad day. Um, my training will kick in, and somebody's going to have a really bad day. But you have to experiment for what works for you. Some people like the back of the plane. I don't. I like the front of the plane. Some people like the middle. Again, I found through trial and error, I like the front. I have to control where I sit. Sometimes you have to purchase an upgraded seat to do that. Um, I personally fly Southwest. I have A-list preferred for a reason. Of course, that's all changing with their new rules, but I have A-list preferred for a reason. I can control where I sit. Most of the flights, I'm one of the first people on in their current scheme of things. I can control where I sit. So that's one of my coping mechanisms. Trains, yeah, hard to do. If I can upgrade to business class on a train, I'll do that because it's less people, less triggers. It's very difficult to control the environment. Again, trial and error. Choose the travel time. Pick a less travel time. Don't pick rush hour to travel if you can avoid it. Less people on a train, more opportunities to get around, move around. When you're on an Amtrak train in the Northeast Corridor at rush hour and there is not a seat to be had, it's very difficult to move around. And again, upgrade if you can. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. Hotels. I like a quiet hotel. I mentioned that I was a Disney nut. I go to Disney quite often. I have learned how to do that. I cannot stay at a Disney hotel. It is absolutely positively outside of my realm to stay at a Disney hotel now. It is simply too noisy for me. I can't control it. One of my last days at a Disney hotel, it, you hear the doors slamming, you hear your neighbors, you hear um, the kids running up and down the hallway. They're all sugared up. They're all excited. They're at Disney. They're having the time of their life. It may be the one time in their life they get to Disney, and they can't control that. The kids are all excited, and sometimes the parents get a little too excited too. Um, but I actually found through this process, I actually found a hotel that is adjacent to Disney in Florida that is absolutely positively one of the quietest hotels I've ever been in my life. You can't hear your neighbors, you can't hear people above you, you can't hear people below you. Um, I love it. It's also reasonably economic, and it's my home away from home. If I got to get away, if work is driving me nuts, I go there and I can escape, and I absolutely positively love it. One of the tricks I've learned is don't be near the service areas. What happens at a service area in a hotel as they're doing housekeeping during the day, the door's going to open and close however many times during the day, the door's going to slam. They can't avoid it. Yeah, I've learned to look at hotel maps and figure out where those rooms are and say, yeah, no, I'm not going to have that room. I choose an upper floor. If I'm on a lower floor, typically it's noisier. I choose an upper floor, keeps me away from things. One of the absolute worst hotels I ever stayed at in my entire life was in downtown Philadelphia back like 2016-ish. I was up on the 20th floor and I swore to you I could hear conversations on the street. It was absolutely horrendous. Um, but usually the upper floor works for me. And you may want to choose a hotel that's not in a popular location. If it's a busy hotel, if it's lots of tourism, lots of conference goers, you may want to pick a place that's away from everybody that works for you. Um,
I
these
just want
things
to
happen.
say everything you're saying about hotels is like exactly what I would choose. And I do suggest to people if you're going on vacation, email the hotel beforehand and ask to make sure that you can be put in a room that you're comfortable with. Usually I'll mention, sensory or that I get anxiety when I hear footsteps overhead. And that is like the first thing I do when I book a hotel for a vacation. I pick my room and then I will make sure that they have accommodations. And I do want to say, make sure that you are asking for it as an accommodation so that it becomes a bigger priority. And sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to.
No, it's absolutely true. Everything she said is right on the money. Um, Usually the hotels can be very accommodating. If they don't, tell them it's an accommodation. I have this disability. It's an accommodation, and see what they can do for you. Um, it can be very difficult, but you have to be your best advocate. You know what works for you. Um, Hi, John. So you have your hand up.
Yeah, just on the word accommodation. So that I don't know, is that an official word that carries like you're mentioning that using that word in a hotel like bumps up the priority or something. Is that
They get a little nervous, particularly in the U.S. when you talk about accommodations because they are used to dealing with ADA.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, and you
Okay.
Um,
don't need a diagnosis for that.
no,
I actually went to New Hampshire. I'm from Canada, so we have a different system, but I went to New Hampshire for 7 days in the fall. And I just talked to their support. I mentioned that it's an accommodation. If you're uncomfortable using the word misophonia, I understand since it's less known. I'll just use like anxiety, PTSD, or a boilerplate term. It's very, very unlikely that they're going to ask for a letter. But if they do, you could always have your primary care provider or your child's therapist or your therapist just write a letter, and that's usually the most they would ask for. However, I have never faced that resistance either in the US or Canada. So there does seem to be a pretty good chance of getting that accommodation.
Cool. Thank you.
yeah, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. Um, and like I said, if you use the word accommodation, that usually will do things. Before I got A-list back, and certainly before I had A-list preferred with Southwest, I had an interaction with somebody um, at a counter, and they absolutely decided to go off on a rail that was not appropriate given the circumstances. And I contacted Southwest customer service afterward, and we had a little discussion about the behavior of their employee. You have to be your best advocate, so don't be afraid to do that. So visual things while I'm traveling. I wear glasses. I'm nearsighted. I'm not quite blind as a bat, but I'm darn close. Um, so you will see if we ever went out to dinner, you'd see me take my glasses off. In addition to sitting with my where I could see everybody coming in the front door and what everybody's going to do, and probably sit in the back of the restaurant where it was nice and quiet and less people. You'll see me take my glasses off. Why do I take my glasses off? Can't see people true if I take my glasses off. Can't see people's legs moving if I take my glasses off, typically, or it helps mask it. And that's why I take my glasses off. I usually position myself to limit sight lines. We're talking visual triggers. We're talking about things like people moving their legs, the guy swaying in the seat. I try to limit myself by positioning where I can't see. I use blocking strategies, my hands. We talked about, I was on a train where the guy was sitting there shaking his leg the entire flight or the entire train ride. I was on a plane ride where a guy was rubbing his legs the entire flight. And I had to use my hand, put my elbow on the tray table and use my hand to block that. Use pillars, use natural things in a building. Use pillars, use barriers to help block those sight lines. Um, Computer screens, you know, what's in front of you. I have my laptop with me usually, or my iPad, or both. I've been known to use both if I have to, just to block those sight lines. Um, some more coping strategies, and we talked about a little bit with this before, but you need to give yourself time to decompress. If you've got this condition, chances are you're gonna get triggered at some point. You have to build in time to decompress. You have to build in time to take yourself out of those situations, to relax and let your brain rest. You got to do what you need to do if you find yourself getting triggered. Um, Build in that time for you to be away from people. Plan on it. Take a break. don't be afraid if I'm running a conference and I find myself getting triggered, and it's time for a coffee break, or we need a bio break, or people want to get up and stretch your legs. Some of the conferences I do are a couple hours long. At a whack, you know what? We've been talking for 45 minutes. Time to get up, take a break, and that allows you to decompress a little. It's important. You got to do it. Um, and we talked about this earlier. Sharon talked about it. Shaylin's talked about it. Calmly explain the condition to someone if they're triggering you. Chances are they don't know that they're doing it. They don't know that their constant sniffling is going to drive you up a tree. Um, if you get confrontational about it, if you get uppity about it, they're going to shut down just as bad as you're shutting down. Chances are they have never heard of this condition. Um, and I've found once you calmly explain it, that typically most people will try to be accommodating. I've actually hurt people that I've cared about, um, because they were triggering and I reacted harshly and I was a little blunt and they shut down and it hurt our relationship. And I deeply regret it. And we've talked about it afterward and I've learned from them, how they react. And that's a good thing, to learn from others. And um, you have to be mindful of how you interact with people. Not everybody's got this. And I constantly have to remind myself of that. So the path forward, yeah, there's a path forward. Um, you can travel with misophonia. I'm living proof of that. It's a matter of trying to figure out how to do it. Um, you have to understand your triggers. Absolutely have to understand what your triggers are. What Sharon's triggers are and Shaylin's triggers are, and my triggers are probably going to be different. We have a lot of commonality. Um, Listening to everybody, we have a lot of commonality, but we're going to be different, and we're going to be different in how we react to those and how we um, try to uh, prepare ourselves for those kinds of things. But be prepared. Have the headphones. Have the earplugs if they work for you. Have something that distracts you from the situation at hand. That's okay to have all that. Have a plan. Plan on what you're going to do so that you're not left scrambling at the last minute. Like Shaylin talked about with the hotel, and I talked about with the hotel. Plan on where you're going to stay. Ask for it. Um, as soon as you make your booking, a lot of people do booking online nowadays. Follow up with the hotel. Send them an email. Call them up on the phone. Say, look, I'm looking for an accommodation, particularly if you can plan it out a couple of days, if you have time to plan the hotel, it's not a last minute trip like that night. You're going the following morning. Because typically in hotels, they do assignments the day before, 2 days before of where people are going to be. And if you let them know and they can attach that to the notes of that hotel, it will help the planner out tremendously. I have developed some friends in the hotel industry, and I've actually some of my better friends now are um, run some hotels down in Florida, and I've learned through them how to accommodate these kinds of things. Have that escape strategy. If you find yourself getting triggered, if you find yourself where you can't cope with it, where it's really pushing you over the edge, figure out how you can deal with it. What's your escape going to be? Um, if I'm on a plane, chances are I'll close my eyes. I'll make damn sure my headphones are working, and I'll turn the volume up, and I'll just try to deal with it while I'm in the plane because I know I can't control that. I typically do shorter flights, so if I get triggered, I'm going to get off the flight. Gets a little difficult when I got to go to the West Coast. I'm going to the West Coast the beginning of June, um, so I have to make sure I'm prepared for that. So open it up for questions. I know we're running a little early, but open it up for questions. Or anybody have any questions about anything we've talked about, even earlier with the earlier presentations? We got some time to do a little recap. before our scheduled end time, but there's been a lot of material that's been presented to everybody. So John, go ahead.
I have a question, but I'm worried about specific triggers. My daughter
Okay.
has a couple of very specific triggers, but I also don't want to trigger anyone in the, would it be best to write them in the chat? I just want to
I
know
think
how.
it's fine to talk about them as long
Yeah, it'd be
as you're
fine to
not
talk
making
about.
the sound.
Okay, I won't make the sound. Um, so there's two whistling, horrible, but there's two.
Whistling literally sends me into the bottom of the earth. That is my first and worst. Most people it's chewing, but for me it's whistling, so I totally get that.
And I guess that's why I'm asking, because like chewing has never been an issue for her. But the
Chewing doesn't
two
trigger me either.
chewing does not.
No, not unless I'm trying to like watch a movie and it's like loud and I can't hear. But in that sense, I think it's more auditory gating where I can't parse out the sounds. I'm not in the triggered state. So, no, chewing is not for me either. So, there is variability in how people have the triggers. There's about 20 to 30 triggers that exist. And I'm actually doing a machine learning study right now to see the characteristics between these sounds. But I've never heard of someone tell me of a trigger that I've never heard of before. There seems to be only these set sounds that cause misophonia. I've heard of one person only having one trigger at all, period, in their whole life, and it's just water dripping and like guzzling sounds. But I've never heard of anybody have something that's not on the list. However, I have heard of people only have one, only have a two, someone have almost all of them. So there is variability in how it presents, just not what triggers
Okay.
exist.
So the two that always trigger her that I've never heard anybody else talk about, one is when a parent wants their child to be quiet.
The
And
shush sound.
yeah,
That is a huge one. And that's actually what Sharon was talking about when she was talking about sharp S's. So she was actually talking about that. She just probably didn't want to make the sound because she hates it.
I
And
see.
it's one of those words where the word itself makes the sound. So I think that's probably why it doesn't come up because people who are triggered by that are less likely to say the word and it happens to be the sound itself.
Right. Um, the other one uh is words that begin with a soft G.
Mhm.
You ever
And
heard
yeah,
anything like
there's
that?
yeah, for different people, it can be different vowels, different consonants, different, letters. And this was actually part of the Duke Misophonia questionnaire. So there is scientific validation for that being a trigger, as well as the sharp S sounds. And pretty much every trigger sound that exists has already been mentioned in literature. So we do have a good basis of what the sounds are, just not why they are.
Um, I think last thing I wanted, not a question, and I don't want to get uh, people's hopes up. I was talking with one of my engineering buddies, and describing, what triggers my daughter, and that there's no cure for it. And he said, and this isn't a cure, but what he said was, why don't you just get some hearing aids and program them to white noise out the triggers?
That's actually been done by audiologists for, I think, 10 years now. You can actually go to specific audiologists and they will mold them to your ears. So that is something that has been used in the past successfully. I personally think that they're too expensive, and you can just do the same thing with Spotify or any app on your phone with either white noise, brown noise, green noise. I prefer pink noise. But honestly, I would suggest, some Apple EarPods or Samsung Buds or Bose Buds with active noise canceling. In my opinion, those will work better than the $4,000 ones that you can get.
I'm wondering though the difference. I mean, what my friend who is ignorant on this was suggesting was that you could wear these all the time and, have conversations, have. So this isn't something that you would just wear while you're alone to sort of help yourself calm down, but something that programmatically removed those triggers from ever getting to you as
The
you're
problem
conversing.
is, the problem is it's either full blocking or it's still there. The masking helps to limit the exposure and distress, but unfortunately, as I linked an article earlier, you can also hear with your eyes based on sensory processing.
Right.
And if you can think of a deaf person, how even this makes a lot of people very upset. And I'm sorry, but I always have to mention it because I hear people say, oh, I want to just go deaf, or a deaf person would still have misophonia because just like that deaf person who's getting a cochlear implant, we hear with our cochlear bone and we hear with that physical vibration of sound. A sound is not just what we perceive and hear, it is also that physical wave going through space. So, unfortunately, there is no way to completely mitigate the trigger other than active noise canceling. And that's why I usually recommend, like even Nina says she uses AirPods. I would recommend active noise canceling over just sound masking because the benefit there is that you can switch between active noise canceling, and most have what's called pass-through mode now, where you can play like your white or pink noise and then still hear everything clearly. And they also have the active noise canceling for when the triggers get too much. So that would be my main suggestion. First of all, because the ones that the audiologists do are very expensive. And second of all, they're not doing anything that can't be gotten elsewhere.
Gotcha.
I hope that made sense.
Yep.
And they can be an awful lot easier to replace if you lose them or something gets broken.
Ah,
And yeah, Connie made a point that some people can anticipate the noise even by seeing the objects or anything that might make the sound even without hearing the noise. And that's definitely true. I know if I go into a waiting room, I'm already anxious if I see that someone even has a pen in their hand. I'm like, that person's going to click the pen. Like, I don't ever have to hear the pen, but I see they have a pen. So now think of it this way. If you're in a room with a snake, you can try to pretend that you're not in a room with a snake. You can tell yourself, oh, it's fine. The snake doesn't hate me. The snake won't hurt me. But your brain, your deep, deep brain, and your amygdala is not going to care that you're telling it that the snake is safe. It's going to say, that snake's going to attack me. And it's deep and it's innate, and it is not anything that we are psychologically coming up with. That reaction comes later.
I see. Um, two more questions.
Sure.
Uh, the leg shaking sounds like a visual cue. I,
Yes.
I haven't heard very many triggers around visual cues besides leg shaking. Um, and why
Well, I
that?
am your perfect candidate for this because I probably have some of the most visual triggers of anyone I know.
Okay.
And it's very weird because when I have an auditory trigger, I feel angry after. Like I feel angry. But when I have a visual trigger, it's very strange for me because I almost just feel like it's my problem and I feel more depressed and I like almost go inwardly and feel like just existence is pain rather than anger. And I don't know why, but I react to that differently. And I have an incredible amount of visual triggers. If you've emailed me, I'm sure you've seen, please don't put double spaces after a period. There's no motion there whatsoever, so I do not know why that's a visual trigger. But when I see two spaces after a period, it is like I am seeing a void. I can feel that space that's there, and it feels like a big, empty, painful void, which sounds ridiculous. but that is how it makes me feel. Text speech, like words that are spelled wrong, like U and R instead of it being spelled out, you might as well just smack me if you're doing that.
Hmm.
This is ruined relationships for me. I've like family because I won't message them if they, use text speech and I just will stop responding. I feel bad, but I just shut down. Um, Pinwheels. Oh my God, pinwheels are, I want to vomit just thinking about them. Anything swaying, things that are off kilter, like if something is, say a door is ajar, or if something's where it shouldn't, isn't supposed to be, like something hanging over a door, it feels wrong.
Okay. So I'm not seeing a whole lot of patterns emerging here. I was thinking
No, the
maybe
visuals
something
are
like frequency thing.
incredibly complex, and that I think is where we really do need research because it's bottom of the barrel, and I do think it is far more complex because it's similar but different, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Okay. And last question, Scott. Oh, and by the way, Scott, I am a Disney Parks employee of 17 years. I
Oh,
feel a need to,
congratulations.
I feel a need to mention that to you. Um, you mentioned something called mimicry, that some people do in order to help after they're triggered to help calm themselves. Or could you talk a little bit more about that? I didn't
Jalen, you want to talk
understand
about
it.
you want to talk about that, or you want me to talk about that?
I think you should talk about it personal experience, and then I'll come in with the science of why.
Okay. Um, so if somebody's sitting there and I just had this the other day and I wasn't in a position to be able to do anything about it, and they sat there and I kid you not, in the space of 5 minutes, they must have cleared their throat probably, I don't know, 2 dozen times. And I just cleared my throat as louder than what they were doing. And I'm like,
You
it
hope they
was
notice,
my
but they never do.
right. Like, can you take a hint? Or I've had some people, oh, you should get that looked at. I'm like, go look in a mirror. I mean, because, and again, they don't know they're doing it most of the time. Um, and it's just I my way of doing it. I had somebody at a Christmas or Thanksgiving thing that sat there and sniffled for however long, and I'm like, "Hey, can you get some Kleenex?" And I tried to ignore it, and I tried to ignore it, and I tried to ignore it, and yeah, it didn't happen. And I'm just finally was just like did one big huge sniffle, and I'm like, people are looking at me. I'm like, I what do you want me to do? I mean, and that's again, holidays are hard. Holidays and being around people are hard, but
The way you're describing it, though, sounds more like you're sort of mad and getting back at them, not so much trying to calm yourself.
it's a strange thing where it actually calms you down.
Huh. All right.
It's an interesting reaction.
And I can get into that now if you want for the scientific side. So, Kumar's research has actually shown that there is a component of misophonia that impacts the mirror neurons. And what that means is, so think of a little child who is, say, a couple months old. They will learn emotions from their parents, and that is through mimicry and what are called mirror neurons. So we have these neurons in our brain that their entire focus for survival is to learn to mimic those around us in order to survive. So it has been shown by Dr. Kumar, who is a wonderful neuroscientist. He's also the one who found the brain basis of misophonia. It was found that mirror neurons are activating in the case of misophonia. So it is not necessarily a cognitive reaction, and it can seem like you're trying to get back at them, and you might cognitively try to explain it that way, but there is a neurological basis that these neurons in the brain are trying to mimic in order to feel that and try to calm down because if you are doing that thing, then it won't harm you. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I was reaching for the unmute button. So
No problem.
there's this sense that if you make the sound yourself, as a reaction to somebody else doing it, that somehow it won't harm you.
Yes, and that is not a cognitive thought. That is based on mirror neurons. So it is more, most people who mimic don't realize they're mimicking. It
Oh,
will happen subconsciously.
okay.
You just feel this innate urge that you have to because things feel out of sync and things feel wrong. And the mimicry is a survival mechanism to try and get comfortable with what's happening. Does that make sense?
It makes enough sense.
And this is where we're getting into like really complex neuroscience. And obviously, there needs to be more answers, but this is what we have so far that has been verified through research.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
And this is why I think, from my experience, it's so hard to nail down this whole misophonia thing, is that it's so varied per person. How, scientifically, how do you justify and back up and make it repeatable and across a large cross section of people? And how do you differentiate misophonia from other conditions? There's some people that claim there's a tie to autism and
Very
other things on the
carefully.
spectrum very carefully. Yes.
And I
Um,
mean, that's where double blinds are going to come in and controls. One thing that, as someone who is doing research on misophonia, I can say it is very, very hard to get a control sample because who are you controlling it against? The general public, people with other mental illnesses? How do you know whether or not someone doesn't have misophonia to be a control when it's an unknown condition? How do you verify what misophonia even means in the study? How do you verify what the absence is? There are so many questions that come up, whereas a more established condition like depression, you can just look at, okay, this person has the physical mechanisms of depression, they're diagnosed, and that diagnosis is an important piece, and then compare it to someone who's not diagnosed. But even in depression research, we are looking at things that, how do you know if someone's undiagnosed? How do you know for sure if someone has this? Like, mental health and neurological research is always going to have that difference where it's not like something like cancer where you can just biologically do a biopsy and look at the cells. Does that make sense? And I see Anna says that she realizes she's doing it, but she can't help it. And that seems to be my experience too. If I do mimic, it's because I feel like I have to, and I'm not necessarily wanting to, but it just feels like the right thing to do.
and sometimes it's just subconscious. You can't you're doing it and you it's just a reaction that you do and afterwards you're like, dang it, didn't mean to do that. And you feel bad. And that's part of the stigma of misophonia is you feel bad. You actually feel bad, right? Or at least I do. That, you know, I can't participate in a holiday gathering with people.
Yeah, that one can be
I
very hard. I mean, I've missed funerals, I've missed weddings, and those are very important life events. And there's still some guilt for missing them, but I've accepted that that was a decision I made for myself at the time because I couldn't handle it. Because it was someone I was very close to in grieving, that added a layer so thick that I could not cope. My nervous system was just absolutely taxed and I couldn't do it. Luckily, my family was very understanding of that, but there's also this huge social piece. And that I think is where the advocacy, communication, negotiations, and of course, coping skills really come in.
understanding what your um, environment's going to be as much as you can. I mean, like me in a conference, I most of the time I have no idea who's going to be around me, but I know who's going to be around me in a family setting. I know what they're going to do, and that's one of the reasons why on a we isolate. I find that a lot of people with misophonia isolate themselves during the holidays because you know, and you don't want to ruin it for everybody else. You know that if you're having a bad day and you get triggered, you may ruin it for the other
Right.
people in your family, and you don't want to do that.
Right.
It makes you feel miserable, and it's hard. I mean, it's socially isolating to have this condition, especially if you're getting triggered. And I know that holidays are going to trigger me. I know that.
How
And I don't want to trigger anybody else.
yeah. How so I was asking before about the community out there, and the Facebook group was mentioned. And I sort of gave up Facebook a long time ago for many of the reasons that a lot of us have. Um, how is the group helpful?
Incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
If your daughter doesn't belong to it, she should.
Okay. Is it
Um,
helpful? I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand how awesome and helpful it is to know that there's other people out there suffering from what you're suffering. What I'm asking, is it helpful beyond that?
I mean,
it can
I
be.
personally don't use it for support, but I'm very off in my own little world mentally. I do share, though, in these groups a lot of free resources, all the resources. And one benefit of Facebook is that you can use an at everyone tag. So if there's something important, like an important event, that's like the best way to not miss it. So I think in that practical case, it can be really helpful. Sometimes clinicians will answer questions. There's a few researchers actually in the group. Joe Ledoux, who discovered the amygdala, I believe, is a member of the group. So certainly
Huh.
there's an invaluable amount of people who are in that community.
Okay.
And like you said, just knowing that other people have it is just crazy.
Right. I just
As
didn't know
far
if
as
it,
far,
a
yeah,
lot of
no,
groups have turned into just politics and stuff like
no,
that.
so like with
Absolutely
Shayla,
no politics.
yeah, no
My opinion
politics.
is misophonia has no color, it has no political ideology. I will immediately shut down anything from any side, and that's not to say I agree or disagree with anyone. My background before I did my master's in counseling psychology, funny enough, I have a bachelor's in political science. So I'm a very hardliner on this is not the place. Disorders are not the place to, go about these differences. We are here to discuss the science and the emotional impact. And I don't want anybody to feel excluded based on any identity. And I do mean any identity. I am very much a centrist and I've always run the groups that way. I have zero tolerance for anything, getting out of hand because this is just not the place. There's a million other places on the internet where you can go and engage in that. And yeah, very hard line on that.
Any advice on how you would encourage, like, I've already said I have this 26-year-old daughter, and
Mhm.
I wanted her to come to this today, and she found reasons not to. And I suspect it's because, maybe she's worried about getting her hopes up, or, um, the usual reason people are afraid of, I don't know, reaching out to others that have similar issues. Any
I would
recommendations on how I would?
say, I mean, I've seen this with teenagers, I've seen this with young adults, I've seen this with 40-year-olds. It can happen kind of in any age group. The thing is, though, that she has to want it for herself. So sending her the video so that maybe she can dab her toes in at her own point, that could be helpful so that it's not, she might have also just had anxiety that there would be triggers here. So you can tell her, no one was making triggering sounds. They were trying to be very respectful. That might be helpful to give her that reassurance that, this was nothing crazy. And the fact that you watched it first, you could maybe relay information and see if anything clicks for her and say, well, maybe you should watch the video. So I think what you're doing right now is actually the best way to go about it to learn for yourself so that you can kind of broach the topic.
Well, and be supportive. I mean, it's incredibly empowering to have somebody that can be supportive and understand that's taking the time. You're taking 4 hours out of your day to help support your daughter and to understand this condition. And that is so incredibly supportive.
Well, I wish
I
I
can
could have
Whether,
done that
say my
15 years
father would
ago.
never. I love him to death, but he would never. But I did get him to watch the Misophonia documentary, Quiet Please, and that made him accept it because if the TV says it, it's true. That's kind of how he's always lived. But yeah, just being able to like engage and learn, that's really the biggest skill we have. And we are running out of time, but I'm fine to keep talking if you want. But if anybody does want to leave now, that's totally fine. And I'm just going to say that I will be sending the videos within 24 hours and any other resources. And you can feel free to email me back on that if you have any questions or you want to know anything else. So if anybody does want to leave now, that is totally fine. But I will stay for a little while if there's any more
yeah, I can,
questions.
and I can stick around a little bit too if I can help. So, but John, I give you a lot of credit for being an advocate for her. It's hard, and
I don't think I've been a
it
very good advocate in the past.
well,
And
but you're here, right? You're here
yeah,
now,
yeah,
and this is such a hard topic, and and personally, as one who has it, to admit that you've got this problem, that who likes to admit that you've got a problem, right? And the first
I
step to
think
solving it
too.
is to admit that you got it.
When you're a parent, it's very hard because I'm sure you did take your daughter to experts and they're telling you things that aren't true. But you want
right.
to be a good parent. You want to listen to the doctor. You want to listen to the psychologist because you are trying to do the absolute best for your child. But unfortunately, they're looking at it, say, an OCD lens. So they're like, oh, expose them, expose them. They're just being bratty. And these things are not true. But unfortunately, these clinicians didn't know any better. And it's the same as if someone had autism in the 1950s and they'd just be kind of like put in another room and be like, whatever, we don't know what to do with them. So, unfortunately, not all mental health
Right.
professionals and doctors do know about this. That's why, educating them is a huge part of what we do. And I do want to like tell you to just kind of forgive yourself for that. You were operating off bad advice, and we can only try to do our best.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, you're
I
welcome.
mean, again, you've done a great thing by coming here. And if she participates in the group, she can reach out to any one of us for support or questions. I mean, it's a hard thing. It's a really hard thing. And it's incredibly supportive. And that's how I got introduced to it was I did a Facebook search on misophonia. I mean, again, I've had it for a lot longer than the name's been around. And I heard the word and I looked and I searched. And what the one caution I will give to Facebook is that there's a couple of different misophonia groups out there, and you have some that are touting cures and treatments. And it's like, yeah, no.
Snake oil, literally
Yeah, so I
snake
mean,
oil.
it's like anything else these days, caveat emptor, of
Sure.
be aware of some of these things where, oh, I sent my daughter to camp and, she got cured and she hasn't had this problem. Or, you know, uh, this person
That's
says to take this.
honestly why I sent the link because all of that are immediately removed. We do not allow any unverified treatments. We don't allow uh, bogus science. It has to be something that is truly ethical and well done. So that group, it's some people say we're too strict, and maybe we are, but to me, it's very important that, things stay on topic and things stay within the realm of what we do know.
Right. There's got to be a scientific basis behind any kind of claims. And I'm actually a moderator or an admin for a couple of different Facebook groups that deal with scientific things. One of which, we talked about concomitant conditions. I have arthritis in a couple different areas. That's wonderful thing.
My,
I've also got
my daughter,
diabetes.
yeah, I mentioned that before. My daughter
Yeah.
seemed to have arthritis in her hands for a few years.
Yep. I have it in my left hand with between my left thumb and my index finger. It's a lot of fun.
And you think this is somehow related,
I don't, but
but you don't.
I
I
don't.
don't either. I honestly think that there's just certain things that
It's a
are very
coincidence.
common in the general population, and
Yeah.
arthritis is unfortunately one of them. So I think it's, the same chance as a regular person. Well, I
Yeah.
don't want to say
And
regular,
that's
but
where, yeah, and that's where that double blind study that you talked about would help bring that out. Is I don't think there's any correlation to that at all. I think it's just
I
we're
think it
just
just
the
happens
unfortunate few.
some people with misophonia will have both.
It's like everything else. I mean,
Okay.
do a survey of the general population. How many people are going to have arthritis? A whole
Right.
lot.
Well, I know we're at time, and I don't want to, I want to respect your time because I'm gonna pest you later anyway. So
Mhm.
I don't need to do it now.
That's totally
Um,
fine.
I really appreciate you creating this and putting it on.
Well,
Well,
thank
thank
you,
you for
and
being
thank
here.
you for coming.
Yeah, thanks to everybody that was here and participated and asked questions or just listened. Um, Shaylin's one of the leaders in the area and is a tireless advocate for those of us with misophonia. Um, she is like a dog on a bone when things come up, the blinking cursor stuff, the other triggers that come about, and she'll just latch onto something and won't
I
stop
think they
until
know
she's
me by
done.
name at Google and Microsoft at this point.
They see her names pop up, and it's like part of it's like, damn it, what do we do to piss her off this time? And
Right.
and
Yeah.
and I love it because she's right. You know what I mean? She's not doing it to be a jerk. She's not doing it to be miserable to people. She's doing it because it's the right thing to do. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
she's getting results. And it's nice to have somebody with a megaphone that's not afraid to speak up and say, we need to pay attention to this because how do these others we talked about cocaine medical problems, how do these other things get attention and money spent for on research? People make noise, right? People are
Yep.
making noise, so she's leading the effort to make noise in this
Yeah,
in
that's
this
the whole
area.
problem. People make noise. That's why we're here.
Right, exactly.
I'm going to ask one more question, and I promise I'm going to go.
Go for it.
You mentioned this documentary, Quiet Please, which I'm sort of looking at on their website right now. Is it good? Is it helpful?
Do you want
People
my
love it.
honest opinion or do you
Yeah.
want
Honest
my
opinion.
kind opinion? It is good if you are coming from a place of absolutely never hearing of it ever, but there's no science in it. It is just people telling their story over and over. So it can be good from an emotional perspective. I mean, there's a little bit of science, but first of all, it happened before all the Kumar research and everything even came out. So by the
Mm.
measure of time, there's things missing. And yeah, my diplomatic answer is it's worth a watch, but it's not anything revolutionary that you wouldn't have heard before.
Here's a better question. Should if I were to show this to relatives, would it make it easier or harder to explain misophonia and
Easier.
maybe okay.
I do
Easier.
think it is good for people who know absolutely nothing. It is a very, very good first point of entry. It's easily digestible. It's not like you're going to be sitting there listening to Dr. Kumar give a lecture on misophonia, which is really hard to listen to. It's very digestible. And yes, I would suggest it for that use, but not like say for yourself where you already know a lot or your daughter. I don't think you guys would get value, but a relative that's never heard of it, I think would definitely,
Yeah.
first of all, be more likely to believe it's real based on that and get the footnotes enough to understand.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm keeping my promise. Thank you very much,
Well, you're
and
No,
welcome and
thank
thank you
you.
for coming.
look forward to the links.
And have a good day, everyone.
You too. Bye.